It's gonna be up to me to come up with one of my brilliant ideas again.
Everybody, welcome to this brand new podcast called Sitcom Kaleidoscope. I am Becca from In the Mic of Madness, and I am here with my co-host,
Brad Farrell, and you can call me Young Bradley.
All right, or in this episode, maybe we'll even call him Mr. Bradley, because we are talking about the facts of life. So how we met and how this even came to pass, I do a lot of podcasts, and he runs a Facebook page, which we'll plug and put some links in for you, but it's called Sitcom Kaleidoscope. He is a sitcom aficionado, and we started talking about some of the shows that we liked and some of the crazy connections and the different things that are kind of more behind the scenes of these sitcoms. So I said, hey, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And he kind of balked at me at first. And then the more we came up with some things, it was like, you know what? Let's do a podcast. So how did you start Sitcom Kaleidoscope, the Facebook group?
Well, I've always been completely enamored with sitcoms. Not only are they entertaining, but I just find that they're completely fascinating in the fact that they are able to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end, make you laugh all the way through, and they do it all in like 22 minutes. So ever since I was a kid, I was just drawn to sitcoms. My true love is vintage comedy, like Laurel and Hardy, Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, the vintage stuff. But sitcoms are a nice offshoot from that. So I started the Sitcom Kaleidoscope page because I watch a lot of sitcoms. I watch at least 3 a day, I would say, 3 episodes a day. I have a huge rotation of about 150 sitcoms that I go through very methodically. I have a list, and I will watch 2 episodes of one and then move on to the next one and watch 2 episodes of that. So I'm kind of like, I don't know, maybe an idiot savant. But I wanted a place.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's what I was told when I was a little boy. I guess I'm starting to believe it. But so I kind of wanted, as I'm watching through here, I notice all these really cool co-stars that will pop up all the time in different sitcoms. I noticed sitcoms that are doing really neat reunions from past sitcoms. I notice just like maybe someone was in an episode of I Dream of Jeannie, and then they pop up 30 years later in Cheers or something. And I'm just like, I want a place to, like a repository to put all these neat connections. And then, you throw in some cool photos that you find on and off the set. You find different paraphernalia, toys, books related to sitcoms, just neat crossovers, just things you really didn't realize were in the show, or interesting facts. So I wanted to sort of put that all together in a group, and I started it, and it became fairly popular. And I'm not going to do any name dropping, but if you join Sitcom Kaleidoscope, you will see a lot of sitcom stars commenting and liking posts on there, and occasionally posting their own things. So that's how the Sitcom Kaleidoscope page came about.
Yeah, and I don't know about you. I don't know your age. I was born in 76. So I grew up in the golden age of sitcoms. So that whole late 70s to late 80s, that was just the gold mine of sitcoms. Now, of course, sitcoms were around before that and after that. But I think for me, that's where, obviously, if anybody knows me, you know that my true passion is horror. And this is, in fact, the first podcast or YouTube thing that I've done that isn't horror related. But for me,
welcome to the other side of the world.
Yeah. No, but see, this is still my wheelhouse. I may not be an idiot savant, but I am like, this is my wheelhouse.
Right. And I love horror too. And I think that's actually how we became friends in the first place. But you were interested in the sitcoms as well. So that's cool to have a broad spectrum.
And as it goes with the sitcoms and horror movies, there are tons of correlations that could be made between those. And we've already found some. And in fact, in this episode, we'll even talk about one.
I can't wait. I can't wait to do my impression of this particular subject either.
Yeah. So what we are doing, we came up with a few different concepts. So we'll have episodes that have basically a tagline, and this one you can see is called "You Take the Good, You Take the Bad." So we are going to discuss the highest rated episode of Facts of Life and the lowest rated episode as found on IMDb. But we do have some other things, like kind of maybe some verses. So maybe debate on who's better, one character from one show versus a character from another show. And some other things. They'll be cool. But we decided to start with this because I think Facts of Life might have been the first thing we talked about.
Yeah, and I think it just came out of nowhere. I think you just mentioned the Facts of Life just as a non sequitur almost, and then we started the conversation from there. And it's interesting, too, that we came up with the idea of doing the highest rated IMDb and the lowest rated, and we didn't even think to match it with you take the good, you take the bad, that whole motif. So that was
we've been working on this for, 3 weeks, and it was this morning that we came up with that. Yeah, okay. Maybe that's where the idiot part of the savant comes in.
Right. So as a disclaimer, too, I just want to say, so we're basing these scores not on one person's opinion of the show, not on our own opinions of the show, but the registered users on IMDb. So all you have to do is be a registered user on IMDb, and you can cast a vote with your ranking between 1 and 10 stars. So just to sort of put it in perspective a little bit, sitcoms don't get a lot of ratings. So, for example, the movie The Avengers had 1.2 million voters. A classic movie like Casablanca has around 500,000. A newer movie like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had 363,000 voters. But a Facts of Life episode has anywhere between 30 and 50 voters. So it's a little more of a niche. But I have to believe, too, that anyone who would take the time to cast a vote for a single episode of a sitcom is probably a pretty big fan. So
true, because you can also you can give a rating to the actual show itself, which here it has 5,400 votes, but we are basing it on the specific episode. So I think you're right. If somebody actually took the time to go and rate it, I think that they're probably a fan and somebody whose opinion is probably one that should be considered.
I agree. So, and it doesn't really matter how high it is or how low it is. It's just that it is the highest and it is the lowest of what we're going to look at. So, Becca, did you watch Facts of Life during the first run?
Yes. So the Facts of Life is probably so we'll just go back to the Facts of Life was a sitcom that ran from 1979 to 1988 on NBC. And we will talk a little bit about the show. I did watch it first run, and it was one that was always on syndication when I was kind of in my adolescent and early teen years and would be at home during the summer, didn't have anywhere to go, couldn't drive. I would watch sitcoms constantly. And this one was always on. And so, I feel like it was on my entire childhood. And really, now that I look at it, it was on for 9 years of it. So, yeah.
9 seasons is a good run, and it did.
That is a good run.
It eventually, and I know you're probably going to mention this because you mentioned to me that you believe that a lot of people don't realize that this show is actually a spinoff.
Right. So, and the other thing that's really cool about this show, I think, is that it went through 5 different kind of changes or iterations, and was successful all the way through. Maybe, the last one maybe kind of pooped out a little bit, but this started as a spinoff of Different Strokes. And the funny thing is that this was when sitcoms were just blowing up, and NBC only really had Different Strokes. They were getting blown out of the water by ABC and CBS. And so they decided Mrs. Garrett was the housekeeper for the Drummonds. She was a very liked character, so they decided to do a spinoff show with her. And they gave Charlotte Rae the disclaimer that if this show fails, you always have your job at Different Strokes. And so she went over to Eastland, which is where Kimberly supposedly went, although we never really saw it.
And at the time too, it was actually the last episode of the first season of Different Strokes where she visited the school with Kimberly, and at the time it was called East Lake, They didn't have
Right.
the wrong name. But and then
Right.
at the end of the episode, they ask Mrs. Garrett to stay, and guess what she says? She says no. She says no. So I don't know that they were fully committed until they saw how well even that episode was received once it aired.
Well, maybe. I mean, but yeah. So I mean, the very first episode of Facts of Life, of course, is the Drummonds visiting her. And Kimberly does show up, but I think that's the only time we see Kimberly at this actual school. I don't think she ever really went there.
And it must have been really confusing for the viewers, too, because so they have this episode, which actually aired in the summer on August 24th, 1979, before the second season premiere of Different Strokes. And at that point, Mrs. Garrett, agreed to stay with East Land at that point. After she kind of helps the girls again. She helps convince Cindy that she's not a lesbian. And
yes. I mean, way to go right out of the gate with the hard-hitting issues.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, and we'll talk about hard-hitting issues even more later. But it was interesting because so they did 4 episodes of Facts of Life during the summer through August 24th into September, and then season 1 of Different Strokes kicked in, and Mrs. Garrett's back with the Drummonds, with no mention of Facts of Life. So I think they were even trying to see further how the show was going to be received before they kicked it off again, because it was actually several months. It was into 1980, March of 1980, when Facts of Life picked back up with the 5th episode.
Yeah. So yeah, it must have been their test run. Yeah, you're right, because they did it 4 consecutive weeks, it looks like. And the first 4 episodes do feel very pilot-ish. So we have we've been talking about before, the theme is different, and it is sung horribly, at least in part, by Charlotte Rae. You also had Jenny O'Hara as Miss Mahoney, and after 4 episodes, she's just gone. She's like Tiger of Facts of Life. Nobody ever mentions her again or anything.
Right, exactly. And then she went on to be Doug Heffernan's mother in King of Queens. It's probably where she's known best. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not as Miss Mahoney. No.
Not as Miss Mahoney.
No, but the first season centered around her being like the house mother for a bunch of girls at a boarding school. And when I say a bunch, yes, there were 7 of them. And that was kind of the failing point for this show. When it got to the end of the first season, they were like 74th in the Nielsen ratings, which was abysmal. But they couldn't afford to just scrap the idea. So they ended up retooling it. But we did the first season, and in fact, all the writers, I think, were fired, and they had new writers come in even. But the first season they did start with that Facts of Life kind of hallmark of having the hard-hitting issues, especially for girls. But all of the characters were so one-dimensional. They were all just caricatures. And so some of those I think probably should have stayed. But we ended up losing Molly Ringwald, which we would have lost her anyway, as everybody knows.
Would have lost her anyway, but probably most people would guess that she left of her own volition, but she was actually let go from the Facts of Life.
Yeah, and she was young. This is way before her Brat Pack kind of thing. We also had Felice, I'm going to say it wrong, it's Felice Schachter, I believe is how you would say her last name, and I found out recently, she played Nancy, who basically, let's just call her Roger's girlfriend. She had like no character, she was obsessed with her boyfriend. But apparently she was kind of second choice to play Kimberly on Different Strokes. So
Right.
they cast her very, very quickly on this. And so we kind of agreed that she probably did dodge a life bullet with that.
Because of the curse.
Yes.
Because of the Different Strokes curse.
So yeah, and then we also lost Cindy, who you also mentioned. So she was the tomboy. And we also lost Sue Ann, which actually I always really liked Sue Ann. She was like the simpleton from Kansas, just, blonde and kind of perky. I thought she had a little bit more personality than some of the girls that stayed, to be quite honest with you. But.
Right. So those 4 that you mentioned, so we have Cindy, Sue Ann, Nancy, and Molly, were all let go, and then they brought in one character to replace all 4. which made it a little bit easier for them to do storylines because there were just too many girls that they had to focus on. So that's when we got Nancy McKeon as the tomboy, and that came from the School of Hard Knocks, and she was Joe Polniacek, and she was the sister of Philip McKeon, who recently passed away, who was from the sitcom Alice. He played Linda Lavin's son, Tommy.
Yeah. And they brought her in apparently because one of the writers or somebody had just recently watched The Little Darlings. And they wanted somebody kind of like that, sort of that tomboy kind of rough girl. And it gave them
the Christy McNichol part.
Yes. Yeah. And so it gave them some conflict, a little bit of edge, a little bit of contrast. So I think it was a good decision, clearly.
Because Blair was kind of like the Tatum O'Neal character from Little Darlings, too.
Yes.
Sort of the rich snob girl.
Yeah. Yep. And so Blair, yes, of course, was in the first season and subsequent ones. And then Tootie and Natalie were two of the younger girls who came over to second season. Now, I recently I still am. I was rewatching this from episode 1 on. And like I've always, in the back of my mind, I always really liked the first season. Like when I think about it, I'm like, man, I wish they would have kept those girls or whatever. And I don't really remember. I mean, I was really young when that happened. I probably, I was only 3, but I always really liked that season. But like watching it now, if you didn't know that they had all the weird conflict and it being such a failure the first season, you really wouldn't know. I mean, because it's so seamless between the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2.
Yeah, and those girls did stay on as recurring roles for a little while, and then I think there was one episode, maybe in the last season or the second to last season, where they all come back except for Molly Ringwald for a reunion.
Yeah, and like some of them, like Molly, I only remember Molly being in like maybe 1 or 2 of the episodes, but it seems like Nancy was back quite a bit.
That very well could be. It's been a while.
I
mentioned I had 150 sitcoms in my rotation, and at this point, this one's not one of them. So at some point, I'll be refamiliarizing myself with the show a little more. Yeah,
just in watching it, I'm about halfway through season 3, and she tends to be the one that seems to come back a lot. She's just, I guess just the most frequent one. But of course, when they get to season 2, they all get different like living arrangements. They all are walking into the cafeteria and figuring out who they're rooming with, and so that is a very good way of just kind of getting rid of the other girls, sort of. I mean, they're still there,
out of sight, out of mind, right?
They're still there, but they're not. Yeah, they weren't like the best of friends anyway. So, but yeah, so our four main girls get together, and they screw up royally in the first episode and end up getting stuck with Mrs. Garrett for the rest of their lives, pretty much.
Can you do a Mrs. Garrett impression? Can you say "girls" like she does?
Girls.
There you go.
Girls. Yeah.
Very good. I'm impressed.
Yeah, that shaky voice.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so obviously it rebounded and it became what we know today, and ended up with 203 episodes. And of those episodes, we found out that the highest rated one, which is a little surprising, is season 5, episode 12, The Christmas Show. And then the lowest rated one is the last episode of season 2, called Brian and Sylvia, which was one of their attempts at making another spinoff. And how many did you find out that they actually had on this show in its entirety?
Spinoffs, or they had a total of 9 what you would call backdoor pilots, which is kind of a sneaky way of making an audience watch a pilot to see how well it's going to fare. So the Facts of Life actually had, within their run, 9 different backdoor pilots. So three of those backdoor pilots were with like current members of the cast, like where they were going to spin off like Blair and Joe at college, at a different college, or I think at the very end too, Blair ends up buying Eastland. Even after they had sort of completely forgot about Eastland for several seasons, she's going to buy it and make it a co-ed. So you would count that as one. But so 6 of the backdoor pilots really had very little to do with the facts of life. They were just kind of showcased on there, snuck in to, trick the audience into watching it. So it's not a big surprise. I think in a lot of cases, maybe the worst episode's going to be a backdoor pilot of some of these shows of this era.
Right. And that might be something that we'll have to cover, is like the worst backdoor pilots ever. Because they are laughable when you watch them. If you watch a continuum now, it's like those are always the big speed bumps in the series. Like, huh? It's always like, oh, well, we're all going to go on vacation, and here are these other 2 people.
Here's the cast of Hello, Larry.
Yes,
Here's another failed McLean Stevenson show.
Yeah, or in this case, Brian and Sylvia, which
Sylvia.
clearly was never a show. Well, sort of. We'll talk about that.
So the best one is the Christmas show, and believe it or not, and I'm going to have to put this in perspective as well, because imagine the movie Gone with the Wind, probably one of the most popular and acclaimed movies, has on the IMDb a rating of 8.1. The Wizard of Oz has an 8.0, and Citizen Kane has an 8.3. But the Christmas show of The Facts of Life is a 9.0, which means it's almost perfect, at least to those 36 voters or so.
Oh, sorry, no, 49.
49 voters,
49
okay. I said between
people.
30
actually,
and 50, so I was
You know what? That's funny, though, because 49 is actually a pretty high number for an episode. Yeah, because like even their next episode right after that only has 27 votes. So people felt strongly about this episode for some reason.
They did. Now okay, let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about the theme song of The Facts of Life.
Oh, yes.
You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. The facts of life.
All right, so that theme song was it's sung by Gloria Loring, and she co-wrote it with her then-husband, Alan Thicke. Who is the father, Jason Seaver, on the sitcom Growing Pains.
And who also recently passed away.
Yeah, he just recently passed away. And then a third guy, Al Burton, contributed to it. But those 3 songwriters, if you will, also wrote the theme song to Different Strokes. Gloria sang the Facts of Life theme song, and Alan Thicke sung the Different Strokes theme song. But as Becca was saying before, the original theme song, now if you walked up to somebody in the street and you said, hey, sing me the theme song to the Facts of Life, I mean, I'm sure 8 out of 10 would just go run screaming from their lives, like, what are you talking about? But the 2 that tried to sing it to you would say, you take the good, you take the bad, right? But that verse was not even in the song originally, and it was partially sung by Charlotte Rae in like a horribly screeching, obnoxious voice.
Right, basically the way she says, girls.
Right. Thankfully, she doesn't sing all of it, but she does contribute to it. So let's take a listen to that real quick.
There's a place you gotta go for learning all you ought to know about the facts of life. The facts of life.
When your books are what you're there about, but looks are what you care about.
The time is right to learn the facts of life.
Yikes. Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Edith Bunker starts singing in All in the Family, like a very similar sort of thing.
That's a good analogy. It's a very good analogy.
Yes, and there are Norman Lear correlations between this. Between Norman Lear and this, although you'll never see his name on anything. His production company was actually the one that made this, but he purposely kept his name off of it. And I'd love to delve in and see why. I don't know if he was embarrassed or if it was just he already had his name on so many sitcoms.
And he was king of the backdoor pilots too.
Oh, he made a career off of it. So basically every show that he had, like, was linked to another show somehow.
Right. It kind of all started with All in the Family.
And in fact, a lot of the people from the show, Charlotte Rae, she wasn't a recurring role on many of them. She was in basically one episode of every one of his shows. Kim Fields had been on Good Times at one point. You know, there was a lot of like kind of shallow gene pool stuff going on there with the Norman Lear verse.
So this episode was directed by Asad Khalada, who was he was a director born in Cairo, and he started kind of directing around the mid-'70s. And his big show was Who's the Boss? He did 117 episodes of that show, but Facts of Life was pretty big for him too. He did 77 of those, and he did other 70s and 80s sitcoms like Family Ties, Rhoda, WKRP, Valerie, Designing Women. So he's been around.
One of the strangest names you'll ever see, but one of the most recognizable names for somebody who grew up watching TV in the 80s. I always was like, is that really a person's name?
Yeah, right.
Little naive, Midwestern, 8-year-old me.
I always suspected it was an anagram for something else, but apparently not. I guess it was a real guy. Yeah. And the writer of this show too, his name was Jerry Meyer. And he had been working since the mid-'60s. But Facts of Life was kind of his big show. He was credited as the developer of the show and wrote 23 episodes. But he had written for shows like Bewitched, All in the Family, again, another Norman Lear connection, MASH, Bob Newhart Show. So he was the one responsible for writing the script of this episode. So what did you think? What did you think, Becca, of this episode? Was it the best?
So we're talking the Christmas show. To me, I could rattle off 10 more that I could probably recite to you. And this one is just not even on my radar. Now, first of all, I'm not a Christmas person. This was really hard for me because I don't like to watch Christmas stuff unless it's December. Like if I go to a store and somebody's humming Jingle Bells in March, I'll punch them. Like I'm a very much just Christmas stays at Christmas. But this is very standard Christmas fare. Like I think you said, like it was full of mush, and it is, and it was okay. I mean, it was fine. It had the girls, it had Mrs. Garrett, it had a nice little moment between Joe and Blair, and blah blah blah. But to me, I do not understand the high rating on this.
Yeah. And I could probably name 10 episodes that I like better, but I think it was a pretty solid, and I do like Christmas year round. In fact, if I turn around right now, my Christmas tree is glowing behind me still. But yeah, I know, I'm sorry. But I thought it did have a good Christmas atmosphere to it. The decorations were all very easy on the eyes. There were several points in the show, I'll admit, I get choked up easily, and I did, feel the little lump in my throat on a couple of the scenes. So I think it was a very good episode, especially as far as Christmas episodes go. But yeah, I would agree with you that it's not the number one episode. But
yeah. And I would say that maybe there was some kind of like, at the time when the show was aired, it was aired on December 21st, 1983, so everybody's in the Christmas spirit. However, I'm sure that that's not what anybody's basing their IMDb
yeah, I don't think there was an IMDb
on.
Then. So
yeah,
they
were like sitting there scrawling them down, like, in 1983, like one day there's going to be somewhere.
They made a mental note in case there's ever occasion to rank this. It's going way at the top.
Yes.
So a couple interesting things about the show too. It was I think we said it was season 5, which was the first season that was outside of Eastland. This is when Charlotte Rae, Mrs. Garrett, had opened up Edna's Edible. So that's where the majority, well, actually all of the show takes place. And there's a character in the lead-in, too, named, the actress's name is Pamela Segal, and she's known now as Pamela Adlon. And she was she was a regular because she was in the lead-in, but she does not appear in this episode. She was credited with 12 appearances in Facts of Life, but only ended up appearing in 9. But you might also recognize her. Fans of the 80s films would know her as Dolores Rebchuk from Grease 2. She was Lorna Luft's little sister. But she went on to a pretty successful career. I think her big was Californication, I guess, would probably be her biggest show. She did a lot of. She was on that Louis C.K. She's in
show,
Lucky
Oh,
Louie.
she's in Young Sheldon.
Young
I
Sheldon.
didn't realize she was in. Yeah.
She played Louis C.K.'s
she-
wife in the short-lived Lucky Louie.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so again, these are the things that we kind of love. We'll have to have the 6 degrees of Pamela Adlon right here. So she was in Grease 2, which also starred 2 of my favorite sitcom stars, Liz and Gene Segal from
Double Trouble.
Double Trouble. Yeah, so that is one we are going to have to talk about, although it's kind of hard to find it. Like, the first season's pretty easy to find, but the second season is kind of difficult to find.
I have them. I can share them with you.
Okay. Aw,
Under the table.
thank
Under the
you.
table, of course.
Yeah. Right. Just, I mean, for the sake of keeping things alive, okay, people? I don't condone, this is one thing that a lot of people will know about me from my other podcast. I don't condone piracy in any way, shape, or form, except for when it is meant for preservation. If it's not available any other way.
You can't get it anywhere
and
else.
those things, then it's better to copy it and share it out and like keep it alive than just to let it die. Anyway, my soapbox, I'm done.
And speaking of the Segal twins, too, I just had recently put something about them on the Sitcom Kaleidoscope Facebook page. And a celebrity who I will not name mentioned that they had no idea until we told them that their older sister was Katie Sagal from Married with Children.
Peg Bundy.
Peg Bundy.
Yep.
Who knew she had little twin sisters? And they had some great scenes. They had some great scenes in Picket Fences too, but we can't talk about that because it's kind of a family.
It's not a sitcom.
It's not a sitcom.
No, but if we go back to our Facts of Life Christmas episodes, the entire plot of this is the 4 girls are going to their respective homes. And Natalie is actually going back with Tootie to her house. But Jo is going to hang out with her mom. She's excited about it. Blair is actually, her parents are away, and so she's going to go skiing in Vail, and she doesn't care that her parents aren't going to be there. And Mrs. Garrett is scrambling because she had to make all these fruitcakes for the Merchants Association.
The Merchants Association really screwed up and mixed up what she was selling with what some of her competitors are selling, and the result of that was just a chaos, and that she ended up with like 50-some extra fruitcakes. And this was...
I'm sorry, Mrs. Garrett. No one likes fruitcake anyway. She should have gone with like cookies or something.
That ad would not made a hill of beans a difference, I must say.
No.
But that...
Like, I mean, homemade fruitcake sounds worse even than store-bought fruitcake.
And we won't even go into Mrs. Garrett's fruitcakes because she was a dietitian, so it probably was like real fruit, maybe even some vegetables in there. Who knows? But she had a guy helping her do this to make all these fruitcakes, and he's like, his name in the show is Mr. Lazzaroni. Although, wouldn't you say that's an Italian name because he does not appear to be Italian whatsoever.
No, and she does refer to him as a young man, and he's clearly not young either, so whatever.
He was 80.
Yeah.
He's 87 years old, and the actor's name is Ian Wolfe, and he had previously appeared in another Facts of Life episode, which coincidentally enough was the Halloween episode as a completely different character. But
yes, but they all knew him. He's the cemetery caretaker. Like, really? Okay. That seems like adding insult to injury to have a guy
right,
that old being the
right.
cemetery.
Like he was one of their own, right? But he and believe it. So he went. This guy, his name's Ian Wolfe, and he went on to live to be 95. He didn't pass away until 1992. But during this era, he was actually doing a lot of sitcom appearances. I mean, he was in like a WKRP and a Barney Miller and an Alice and It's a Living. And I remembered him the best from his appearance in Cheers, where he played a World War I veteran named Buzz Crowder that came into the bar to have a reunion with his squadron mates.
That's him.
Yeah, that was him. And none of them showed up because he was the last living one.
Yeah, they were all dead. Yes, and I was not a huge Cheers fan, but for whatever reason, that episode still, like, you mentioned it.
It haunts you. Yeah.
Yes.
It is. It was pretty sad. And there's a scene at the end of the Cheers where the people in the bar say, well, just because all of those friends are gone, we could be your new friends and we could get together every 10 years, which, if they had stuck to that, he would have never made it. But so then they say...
Which is probably why they said it.
Well, then they bartered down to, how's about every... And this is his line. He says, how's about every week? But he uses that phrase. How's about? And he reuses it in Facts of Life. And as soon as he said that, I was like, wow, I bet that's an Ian Wolfe phrase. That couldn't have been in the script.
I bet that's his thing.
So yeah,
I
mean, talk about useless knowledge, but that really struck me. But this guy his credits go back to the 1930s. He's actually in an Alfred Hitchcock film, Foreign Correspondent, but mostly back in those days he did dramas. But he did appear in some vintage sitcoms like Our Miss Brooks and Andy Griffith's Show, and he's in All in the Family as well, a Partridge Family. And but I always, Cheers was the one that stuck out for me, that's kind of saying a little bit about me more than him, that of all the appearances he did over the course of 60 years, Cheers stuck out the most. But I recently I inherited an autograph collection of a collector who had sent away for a lot of autographs back in the 70s and 80s, and I was really excited that there was an Ian Wolfe autograph in there.
Oh,
that was one of my highlights, yeah.
Yeah. Sweet.
So do we want to listen to, there's a culmination of this plot line where Mr. Lazzaroni agrees to take payment for what Mrs. Garrett lost a lot of money, so he agreed to take his payment in fruitcakes and then donate them to a home. So do you want to listen?
A nursing home.
Yeah. At least it wasn't it wasn't going to bury him with the at the cemetery.
So yeah, we'll take a listen to that.
Here's your check for your first week's services.
Edna, I know you feel this amount is adequate, but it just won't do.
What amount do you feel it should be?
According to my figures, you owe me 50 fruitcakes. And I won't take a crumb less.
I'm going to guess that this tore you up.
Yeah, it was one of the moments where I felt a little something in my eye, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sweet moment and it's a sweet gesture. I'm not sure, he seemed to be working a lot because this took place over several days.
Well, he had an apron on. He had an apron on, so that would indicate some real heavy lifting, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, and then he was Santa, and I mean, he clocked in some hours. He probably got the shit end of that deal, yeah. I would think.
Right. But so being Santa, that sort of brings us to the second plot point, which is a kind of a very minor plot point. But you mentioned that Natalie and Tootie were going to go spend Christmas together. Now, did you realize, I'm sure it had been mentioned before, that Natalie's character was Jewish?
Yeah, I'm sure that it has been mentioned before, but I don't know that the spotlight has been put on it that much.
And it really wasn't here either. I think she said at one point that this was her first Christmas, but she was so cavalier about it, like it wasn't any big deal, that she was just going to be celebrating Christmas this year. And she was hoping that her family would give her a new stereo. So that's kind of the third or the second plot point of the episode.
Right.
So she ends up, well, let's take a listen here what happens, because I think this is kind of a cute moment when Tootie advises her that maybe she should ask Santa for the stereo. So she gets to sit on Mr. Lazzaroni's lap.
Put it right here.
Don't mind if I do. Now, what I want is...
No, Natalie. Excuse her. She has got no experience. Santa always goes first. Hit it.
Ho, ho, ho. What's your name, little girl?
You know my name. Natalie.
My name is Natalie, Santa.
Natalie, the package is here. I signed for it.
And I think it was really cute how before that, I mean, Tootie it became a little, she's always been the child of the group, but at this point in time, she's, much older, but she still had that childlike thing. She was like, well, every time I asked Santa for something, I mean, I got it. And like Natalie had that same, it was almost like first season Natalie and Tootie, because Natalie's
Right.
like, really? Okay, let's try this, you know?
I did love the way she was like a non-believer 1 second, and then all of a sudden she's like, "Hi, Santa, I'm Natalie." You know, that was kind of.
And let's just say, Mindy Cohn was adorable.
She was.
She still is. And she actually was not an actress. She was at a boarding school where, when this was being developed, they went to do interviews with the kids just to kind of get some ideas about, like, you know, how these girls at the school would be. And they liked her and her adorable little voice. So she ended up getting on the show.
And one of my friends actually went to college with Mindy Cohn. And so I met her one time, and he was with me. So the whole conversation was monopolized of talking about that. I wanted to talk about Facts of Life. But I had her sign my picture. Let's have some decorum, because that was one of her lines when they had the big paint fight.
Oh, yes,
remember
yes.
that? Yeah.
Yes, the big paint fight, which ends up on the second season's iteration of the opening credits. It's the ending of the second season's credits.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might be my favorite
Beautiful.
episode, actually.
Yeah, I do like that episode. Now, I will say that some of my favorite episodes really, in my mind's eye, came from the first season. But now that I rewatched them, I'm like, oh no. I mean, they were so topical, that first season. It was like, basically, yeah, you had the lesbian episode. You had the anorexia episode. You had, you know, I mean, every one of them had just a very basic topic, and that's maybe why they stand out.
There are certainly some very deep, dark topics on here. And at the end of this podcast, I have a few of them I will bring to attention, because a lot of those are amongst the highest rated episodes that they had. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure we will talk about Facts of Life on more than one occasion, but that's okay. So Natalie is going away. Her parents are sending her gift, and so that's why she's kind of very anxious about it coming. And then Jo got her mom a silk blouse. She's excited about hanging out with her mom. She actually bought the blouse this time, unlike the one that she got for Mrs. Garrett years ago.
Right.
And that might be one of my favorite ones. I don't know why, but I love that episode in season 2 where the girls basically learn how to shoplift from Jo. They learn a lot from Jo that second season.
A lot of bad things.
Yes.
But that's kind of the main plot of the whole episode, is that Jo's trip to visit her mom gets nixed. And Blair steps in and tries to orchestrate it so that Jo will win, and I do that with air quotes, will win a ticket to Miami to go visit her mom. And, of course, the pride that Jo has prevents her from accepting that gift, and actually, you know, pisses her off like it always does.
Right. Yeah, because you cannot do anything nice for her.
Don't do anything nice for Jo. That's the one takeaway from this entire show.
Yes, exactly. So they have to, I mean, and the fact that she just wants to do, the girls are in on it, Tootie's in on it, and they just want to do something nice for her, but they have to orchestrate this elaborate ruse to be able to do something nice for her.
And it's funny too, because they don't trust Natalie enough to let her know what they're doing. So Natalie,
which is very uncharacteristic, because usually it was always Tootie that didn't get let in on stuff because she was.
This was Tootie's revenge, I think. But Natalie actually purchases a ticket because she thinks she could win a tape deck to go along with the stereo that she may or may not get, and she's pretty ticked off when she finds out it was all that she was kept in the dark on it.
I can't imagine a stereo from 1983 that didn't have a tape deck built in, but that's okay. I guess if you got one of those modular ones, like the cool like Pioneer systems that had like a 5-foot tall like speaker with them. Right. And then not sure where she would put that, in that room, but okay.
And then the scene that we heard too, when she gets the coat and she's disappointed that it's not a stereo. I always wonder how she could pick up that box with a coat in it and think that it could be a stereo.
Yeah, that is true.
I mean, back then,
That is true.
stereos weighed like, what, 400 pounds or something?
And they were much larger. You could not just hold it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, unless it was like maybe I don't know. Did we really even like we didn't even really have like those little boombox things, like those little compatible portable ones, like in '83. I mean, she's talking about a full-fledged freaking blow out your window stereo.
I think so,
clearly.
because a boombox would have definitely had a tape deck in it.
Yeah. See, these are the rabbit holes that I love to go down. This is basically what I base my entire YouTube channel on, is I go down these rabbit holes for random characters in horror movies who die. And nobody else knows who they are, but I keep their spirit alive.
Do you speculate on, like, why did they have to die type of thing, or?
Or no, just about different things about them, like, their personality and what was their life like, before the movie.
Oh, right. Yeah, I did see the one you did on Tiffany Helm.
Yes, Violet. So from Friday, Part 5.
Plug.
So, yeah, there we go. Not Quite Final Girl is my channel. But, yeah, so Blair's the only one who doesn't really get, like, I mean, her trip isn't really being, like, highlighted. She's just being Blair. She shows up in a fur coat, and she's just like, I'm going skiing, whatever, through the whole episode. And towards the end, they all leave. Mrs. Garrett takes them all to the train station, and Joe's kind of left by herself. Or they go to the train station. Mrs. Garrett's cooking hamburgers, correct?
Yeah, they're going to cook hamburgers and listen to Christmas music. That's their Christmas. And Joe, I can't really tell if Joe's really sort of getting into the spirit of that, or if she's just covering up the incredible pain that she's holding down. But she's a good sport about it. At least she goes out and she's laying out some more Christmas decorations and gazing longingly at her stocking, which is alone next to Mrs. Garrett's. I guess they all took their stockings with them. What was Blair going to do with the stocking on the ski slope? I don't know.
But I love how even that, alone with Mrs. Garrett, like none of them considered Mrs. Garrett as like viable company through the holidays, which is really kind of, I would be insulted if I were Mrs. Garrett.
And that comes up several times because Tootie says something about, oh, that stinks. You're going to be here alone with Mrs. Garrett.
Miss Garrett,
and then,
yes.
And then she quickly throws in peak skill, like peak skill's the problem, not Mrs. Garrett.
Right. Well, and nobody even once is like, oh, Mrs. Garrett, what are you going to do for Christmas? Are your sons coming back? No, nobody even cares that she's going to be alone for Christmas.
With the fruitcakes and with
Yes.
Mr. Lazzaroni.
Yeah, Mr. Lazzaroni, he's got the fruitcakes and he's going to the nursing home. He's going to go have his
that's
party.
right.
So,
Right.
yeah, she's screwed.
And I always wondered if he was doing that out of the goodness of his heart, or there was some chicks at the nursing home that he wanted to hook up with in exchange for fruitcakes.
Probably. I mean, he would have been a stud, a geriatric stud, right? I mean, like almost like he was still out,
Yes,
Like,
right. So Joe does get a little surprise at the end of the episode, which I was half expecting at the beginning of the episode, since I hadn't seen it in so long, or if I ever had, I was expecting them to all end up together.
Yes.
No matter what transpired over the course of the show, I figured they were all going to wind up stuck together. But that's not quite the case. So let's have a listen to how the episode actually ends. This brings us right to the end of the episode.
Hi.
Hi. Thought you were on your way to the slopes.
I was.
So what are you doing here?
I'm here because just no place like Peekskill at Christmas.
Right. Yeah, I hear Perry Como's doing a special here next year.
Look, Joe, I had 3 choices. The cocktail party circuit in Manhattan, a drunken brawl with strangers on the slopes, or being here with you guys. And I decided I wanted to be here.
Good choice.
So that was tier number 2, I guess, because I've always had a weakness for a character that is typically unlikable that does something super nice. I think I have never been so choked up as the episode of All in the Family where Archie finally gives Mike a big hug. I think, and this is kind of along those lines, although this wasn't quite as touching, but it was very nice that Joe chose to come back. Blair chose to come back and spend her Christmas with Joe and Mrs. Garrett.
Yeah.
So
and by this point in the show, I mean, they still had their conflict, but it was very evident by now that they really are a family, despite their differences.
Yeah, the conflict was muted.
They wouldn't have been friends normally, but they were family.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. Aww. And then, your obligatory clapping. The end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I thought that Natalie and Tootie were going to come back and be like, you know what, we decided.
Right.
But yeah.
Or the snow in where all the airports were closed or the train station, the train had derailed or whatever,
But it was the fact that Blair chose to come back, and it was specifically Blair. She was not backing down from the idea that she wanted to do something nice for Joe to make Joe's holiday special.
But she did it without spending money. That was the key. That's why Joe accepted that, but she would not accept what she would consider charity.
Right. Oh, Joe, you tough one. So, good episode. Not the best I've ever seen, but good episode.
So, I wanted to bring up one thing. Did you notice the Charlie Chaplin City Lights poster on the wall in their room? I think that's pretty prominent, but I had never noticed the Marx Brothers Coconuts poster. I think it was over Natalie's bed.
I don't, but Natalie, that was something that they've brought up in previous seasons, that Natalie was very into vintage comedy, so that would make sense.
Okay, that's good. I was going to ask you that, if you remembered that she was actually into vintage comedy.
Well, I think it's second or third season where one of the teachers is raped on campus, and so they do self-defense classes. Natalie actually gets attacked on her way back from a party, and she is dressed as Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, I do remember that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that...
Again, another dark one.
A dark one, yeah. And who would go after someone dressed as Charlie Chaplin? That's even more mind-boggling.
That is a little odd.
But I think they missed the boat though by never having an episode where the four girls portrayed the Marx Brothers.
That is true. Yeah. Through
one of the tropes, like a dream sequence or costume party or something. Yeah. I don't know which one would be Zeppo. Maybe Blair.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
She's not too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Okay. Derailing again. Okay, so that was the Christmas show. So that was the highest rated episode of Facts of Life. So now we are going to go into the lowest rated episode of the Facts of Life, which is from season 2, episode 16, called Brian and Sylvia. It aired on March 25th, 1981, and it actually does have a 6.2, and it has 47 ratings, which again is pretty high for an episode. So people felt strongly enough about this in the other way to rate it.
Right, and I'm surprised it even got into the 6 range because it is a pretty bad episode.
It is, yeah.
And more puzzling than anything is why they would have thought this would have made a good series. As we mentioned, it was a backdoor pilot. It was originally intended to sort of pitch this idea of bringing a mixed marriage couple into a sitcom. And the thing is that's not a revolutionary idea by any stretch of the imagination at this point.
Well, I mean, we've already had, and I won't be able to think of their name, but you will be able to. I mean, we already had the Jeffersons.
Yeah, we had Helen and Tom Willis had been a mixed marriage couple since 1975, and those were lead characters of a show.
Yeah.
Even going back further than that, we had already explored the whole idea of a Jewish Catholic mixed marriage, which would be absolutely nothing today. But back in, I think, 1971, Bridget Loves Bernie with David Burney and Meredith Baxter. Meredith Baxter, eventually Bernie. She married her co-star, yeah. But, so the Jeffersons had already done this. And, well, actually, you can even go back to I Love Lucy, where we had Cuban.
He's Cuban. Yeah.
So I think they thought that this would be more interesting than it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it all had been done. So basically, Tootie and Natalie are going into the city, into Buffalo, actually, to visit Tootie's aunt, who is married to a guy named Brian. Uncle Brian is a boys hockey coach. All of this is just, it's all set up. I mean, a pilot episode of anything is really usually a pretty bad episode anyway, like even of the best shows, because it's just a lot of exposition, a lot of explaining who's who and whatever. But then when you get into this and it's just a lot of explaining of these people that you don't care about, it gets even worse. But we go to their apartment, to Aunt Sylvia and Uncle Brian's apartment, where they are presumably waiting for Tootie to get there. And we see that Brian is white and Sylvia is black, but a very, very light-skinned black woman. Anyway, so...
And that was Roseanne Catan, who had played
yes.
Grady's granddaughter in the sitcom Grady, which is a spinoff of Sanford and Son. So we're back to Norman Lear.
And I'm going to go back to horror. She was also in Motel Hell, which is one of my favorite movies ever. But I also was, I found this. I don't know if you know this, but she was in Zapped with Felice Schechter.
With Felice Schechter. Wow.
Yes. I think all these people must have had like the same agents.
So many
really.
Connections. Oh,
yes.
You could draw a family tree it would take up the Great Wall of China, you know.
Oh my gosh.
All these connections.
Yeah, the flow chart.
But so I think we got a little ahead. The episode begins back at Eastland. So now, since we're in season 2, we're still at the Eastland School in Peekskill, which, incidentally, if you don't know, Peekskill is actually a real city. It's just north of New York City by, 20 miles or something?
Mm-hmm. When I was young, I used to think that was a fake town because it sounds fake.
It does. Yeah. It does. It sounds too good to be true. But so, yeah, they do a little exposition as to why Natalie and Tootie are going to visit her aunt, because she works at a TV studio. So they're all excited to see a TV studio. And Natalie, being boy crazy, is excited that Brian is as a hockey coach, and he apparently a former Olympian at that.
Yes. They gave him a lot of backstory, really.
Yeah, they did. And the writer of this episode, Jack Ellenson, he was a seasoned writer. I mean, he had worked in a lot of like old shows, like The Real McCoys and the Danny Thomas Show, and he actually wrote 34 episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. Wow. So he had done a lot of stuff before, so I don't know why this episode
good times.
Good times.
Looking at his IMDb.
Yeah, One Day at a Time, Doris Day, yeah. Gomer Pyle, and he was a developer of 227.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they're at Eastland and they do a little explaining, I think for maybe 2 minutes, as to, well, first they can't find the tickets, then they find them and they sort of explain why they're going there, and then the next scene, they're not there yet. We just see 8 minutes of all this other exposition as to Brian and Sylvia and how they got together. And they allude to the fact that the mixed marriage at least has been a big deal for their parents. They make a few jokes. I think, what does she call him, white bread or something? And he says something about how he can't tell when she's blushing, like really bad taste jokes.
But just a couple, and that's it.
That's it. And then the mother, her mother, Ethel, comes to visit, and they make a crack about how she had picketed the wedding, but she's clearly over it. She's over the fact that her daughter's married this white guy. And
now she absolutely adores him. It's even turned completely the other way.
But then he gets a phone call from his father, and there's still obviously some friction there because he mentions that, it took everything he had to send his love to Ethel. But the thing is they never explore any of the friction. The episode ultimately could have been a Chinese couple. There was nothing that had to do with anyone's race, really. in this
Well,
plot.
it could have been just two white people.
Two
like,
white people,
I mean, the whole
anybody, yeah,
idea of like the in-laws of each other not getting along, that's an age-old issue.
We didn't mention who played Brian.
Yes, so MacGyver,
Richard Dean
and you
Anderson.
know what, guys?
Tell us.
It's a good thing he didn't go into comedy.
That's the thing. Why they would have chosen him to be a lead in a sitcom? There has to be some sort of nepotism going on there or something, because he was never a comedian at the time. His only credit had been what, General Hospital? It was a soap opera, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is he was terrible in this. Terrible. Yes, General Hospital. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, he was only on 12 episodes. Dr. Jeff Weber. Yes. But yeah, he is not a comedy star or comedy actor by any stretch of the imagination. Now, she's pretty good.
She is.
I actually thought Sylvia was pretty likable.
She's very likable.
I watched a show with her.
She's very cute and very likable. And she would have been a good lead had this been picked up.
Yeah.
But like we said, she had played Grady's granddaughter in the Sanford and Son spinoff Grady, and in turn she had been in the backdoor pilot for Grady that appeared on Sanford and Son, and then she had roles in like That's My Mama and did you mention Good Times? I think and
I don't know if I mentioned that one.
She actually I think she retired from film. I think her last appearance was Full House, maybe like around 1991.
Yes, it looks like 91. So yeah.
So, but yeah, Richard Dean Anderson is beyond bad. Let's listen in to this clip where, at first he sounds like this ideal, loving husband, and then when something doesn't go his way, his temper goes from about 0 to 60 in 2 seconds.
I have a chance of getting off the 5 o'clock news and doing the 6 o'clock news.
Honey, fantastic! The plum assignment. I'm so happy for you.
Yeah. The 6 o'clock news is the one I've been shooting for.
And now you got it.
I have to call back and say whether I'm accepting it or not.
You mean you haven't said yes yet?
I was waiting to talk to you first.
Sil, that is silly. Now you call him back right now, this minute. Come on.
Right. There's one little problem, though.
Call.
The job is in New York City.
Hang up that phone. New York City? How the hell did New York get into this all of a sudden?
Oh, that's where the offer came from. Fred Scott, Channel 10. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, like the last time I went to the dentist for a root canal.
Yeah, he turns into basically the biggest jerk ever. It's a pendulum swing.
And that brings us to, this is 10 minutes into the show, and this is when Natalie and Tootie show up at the door. And the first thing they hear, it's like our token gift for tuning into this rubbish. By the way, you guys still are watching Facts of Life, even though it has no appearance of being Facts of Life. But, and they're immediately introduced to this problem. And then they bring back this premise of the mixed marriage being something very controversial, because surprisingly enough, Natalie's not even okay with it, or she's not okay with the fact that she wasn't told about it in advance.
Rudy, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That it was a mixed marriage. What do you mean a mixed marriage? She's not Jewish. Come on, you know what I mean. Well, it never occurred to me to mention it. Brian's one of the family, so we don't even think about it. Are you shocked? Shocked? Are you kidding? I'm a very progressive, liberal-minded, today person. Yeah, I'm shocked.
Okay, so this threw me off horribly, because I thought that when Natalie was saying, hey, Tootie, you didn't tell me, I thought it was that she didn't tell her that her uncle was so handsome, because Natalie's always the horny one.
Right.
I didn't even think it was like the mixed marriage thing and then she gets kind of all weirded out. Well, first of all, Natalie was all about going gaga over Uncle Brian when she thought Uncle Brian was black. So why would she have a problem anyway if Uncle Brian's white and married to a black woman? Clearly she didn't have a problem when it was like her theoretically.
Well, the interesting thing is, though, if you remember later on, I think we're back in season 5. Natalie wants to date a member of Tootie's family, and Tootie, remember that? And Tootie is adamantly against it, and she brings up Brian and Sylvia and says that the marriage didn't work. So we don't know it yet, but not only did this pilot fail, but the marriage actually failed too, and Tootie blamed it on it being a mixed marriage. So who knows what intricate thought process went into all this?
But, really, if there was a reason their marriage didn't work, I mean, aside from the fact that their show never got off the ground.
It's because MacGyver was an asshole.
Yes, he was a jerk. So she gets a chance to, she's a newscaster, kind of, small town, sort of small peanuts newscaster in Buffalo. She gets the chance to be a newscaster in New York City, which is not even that huge of a move. I'm sorry. But he gets all bent out of shape because he's like working with like some like
youth center,
boys club
youth
thing.
Center.
Yeah. He can't possibly leave that. And I'm assuming.
Well, everybody knows once you have hockey students under your wing, you can never leave them.
Right. That's true.
There's not going to be any sort of comparable job in New York City.
No, there are not any needy kids in, who are in search of guidance from a male mentor who was an Olympian.
Right. Yeah. And it just so happens that this all culminates while Sylvia is having Brian as a guest on her news program. And she's interviewing him about the youth center. And then it comes up, and that's when he finally says that he is going to not take the job. Or he's going to let her take the job, and he's going to move to New York City with her.
Right. And that's supposed to be the like awe moment, where everybody's like, oh, it's so sweet. But it fails because, first of all, he shouldn't have given her crap to start out with. There maybe could have been a, hey, can we talk about this sort of conversation? But he flew off the handle. And so there was nothing cute about it, like at all.
And this all takes place in the course of one day, right? I mean.
Oh, yeah. Within hours, right? Because they're sitting there waiting for Tootie, and then they're at the station, like, within... Tootie and Natalie show up, and then they're supposed to go to the station in 10 minutes.
Right. Sitcom time works a little bit differently.
Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, got him to and through the Olympics. And, and his work with those kids is just taking off. So he actually has he has some sort of like a debt to owe to the town of Buffalo, apparently.
Yeah, that could, now that you say that, that could be true. I think he just has daddy issues. Because if you think about that phone call of his dad's, he had to leave the room to talk to him. He obviously hasn't stood up to him. And I think that that is the source of his jackassishness.
He's got to play the man.
Right.
But we should go back. Actually, her mom, and you're going to be able to say how her name is pronounced because you met her.
Last weekend, I met her last weekend. Remarkably, it was just a coincidence. I mean, it wasn't a coincidence that I met her, but it was a coincidence that it was the timing of doing this podcast. But her name is pronounced Jeanne Dubois. And the ja is pronounced like Zsa Zsa Gabor. She made that very clear. It's not Jeanne.
So not Jeanne.
It's not Jeanne.
And it's not Janet.
It's not Janet. It's Jeanne Dubois. So she was Ethel. She played Sylvia's mother. And she told me, so I asked her about this episode. And first of all, I mentioned that we were going to do a podcast about it. And the first thing she did was refer me to her agent, which was standing right next to her. And I said, no, I don't need you to talk on the podcast. I was just asking you about the show. And she said she remembered it very fondly, didn't have a lot of things, but she did say one interesting thing, which she could be remembering it wrong, but she said that they filmed 2 episodes of Brian and Sylvia. So it's very possible that they did another test episode to pitch as a pilot that failed, because a lot of times pilots never make it to the air. It makes sense, or she could, because a lot of times too with sitcoms they would film it once in the afternoon and they'd film it again in the evening, and she may have been remembering filming it twice, or she just could have been completely misremembering all of it. But
right, because it is pretty forgettable.
It is pretty forgettable, and it was a long time ago. I mean, it was, what, 35 years ago at this point?
Yeah. So yeah, she was on Good Times, actually. And I only just figured out, she sings the Jeffersons theme.
She sings the Jeffersons theme song, and then if you just now realize this, you probably didn't notice that she says to her daughter Sylvia, "You're moving on up."
Yes, she's moving on up.
She says, "You're moving on up." So we know that had to be an inside joke.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Now I know Becca is dying to tell you about the other person who appears in this episode.
Yeah. Very, very briefly. So you wouldn't even know if it weren't for Brad, I wouldn't know. So she has, she's a newscaster, and she's got like the sports guy and the weather guy or whatever at the desk with her. And one of them is actually Ron Sloan Jr. from Friday the 13th, Part 5. And I actually discussed this.
Are you dumb or something? my favorite
I actually
line.
discussed this briefly on in the Micah Madness breakdown of Friday the 13th, Part 5. So crazy stuff.
But so the interesting thing with him, especially, not just that he was a Friday the 13th guy, but when you see him appear on the screen for the first time, he's standing around the news desk, and he kind of shakes his head and walks away, like there was a filmed conversation where he got insulted, or who knows. He just looks like the type of guy that would have been the Ted Knight of the newsroom.
Yeah, he does look like.
Even though he has no line, you do not hear a single line from him, but you can just tell. But it looks like he had just been insulted and he walks away. So that part was cut out.
Right, and that might have been that. You could assume there were probably two ways of going with that. He didn't want to be bossed around by a woman, and he didn't want to be bossed around by a black woman. Or the thinly veiled, which we knew this would come up if the show were ever, materialized. But the station manager, Ray, is a neurotic gay man. Like, he is like a stereotype.
Yes, yes. And that was that guy was named Anthony Holland, and he was a Jewish stage comedian. But he had some other credits too, like in sitcoms like MASH and Mary Tyler Moore. I think One Day at a Time. But he had enough time on screen where he would have definitely been a regular in the show.
Yeah.
And Ron Sloan. So I asked Ron Sloan about this pilot because I was just fascinated by the fact, not so much that he appeared in it, but the fact that he didn't do anything. He was credited and he was given a name, but he didn't do anything. And he said that they had filmed several scenes with him, including him giving the sports. But he said as soon as the shot came to him, which in rehearsal apparently was just a one shot of him, they cut to the inside of the station room, or whatever you call it, the control room. And he's on a screen that's about, thimble sized, and you don't hear any of his lines. It's all drowned out with other dialogue. And he said that he would have been a regular on the show had it been picked up, but he said he had all his friends and family over to watch this show, and that's what he ended up with. No lines and like a thimble-sized monitor in the control room. But he
embarrassing.
And he claimed too that the only reason they cut in there is because the director that is sitting at the desk is the actual show director, John Boab. So he thought that it was a little vanity thing where he wanted to appear in the episode.
He wanted to do his Stephen King cameo.
Yeah, and that's exclusive information to everyone here because he is not credited either in the credits or in the IMDb as being in the show. John Boab, the director.
Ooh, there you go.
It's a scoop. It's a scoop. He did a lot of 80s. He did a lot of 80s and 90s shows too. He did like Benson and Bosom Buddies, Give Me a Break, Cosby Show, It's a Living. So he had some chops as well.
And so when we made this connection, that day that we made the connection, I was prepping for my Friday the 13th Part 5 podcast and watching it. And that's when I got the message from Brad that Ron Sloan was in this. Also, that same day, I am in a movie called Red Summer Massacre, and one of the producers, Noelle Berger, is in a film called 13 Fanboy that's being filmed right now. It's Deborah Voorhees's. It's a Friday. It's not a Friday the 13th movie. It's more about the conventions, like the Friday the 13th people at conventions, and they're being stalked. And one of the people in it. So she mentions in our little group chat something about, oh, she got to work with Ron Sloan today and he was so nice. And I'm like, how is it that I have like 6 degrees of separation of like Ron Sloan in like the span of 2 hours?
Not even 6 degrees. That's like 1 degree 3 times.
3 times. I know. I was like, wow. Okay, if he knocks on my door right now, then things are going to get real creepy.
But he was nice enough to answer those questions about the show. So he's a really nice guy. I like him a lot.
Thank you, Ron. Love you, Ron.
Yeah,
Junior is one of my favorite Friday characters.
Are you dumb or something?
Junior and Ethel, like, that movie has a lot of classic characters, but definitely Junior and Ethel.
And he ultimately gets his head chopped off, just FYI.
Yes.
And he carries the prop around with him when he makes appearances at some of those shows.
Now, do you know? And that movie, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but that movie was the most like eviscerated one of the franchise. They had a terrible time with the MPAA, and so one of the things they had to cut was his head was supposed to bounce several times. But the MPAA eventually, like they said, okay, it can bounce 1 time. That's it. So.
Jeez. Well,
yeah,
they got pretty granular.
They did.
They compromised at 1.5 bounce. You saw it go up, but not down.
Right.
But that's probably good for the fans because now they get to see a less damaged head when he brings it with him. I'm assuming that is
true.
The head. I don't know I think that's the head that he brings with him.
I would imagine, he didn't probably go pay to get his head cast.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a pricey little thing, but
right.
Maybe not.
That'd be my next question for him.
Yes, please ask. But then they do when they're on the air and she's interviewing him. We do find out he is part of that 1976 Olympic hockey team. So it actually makes more sense that they put him as an Olympian, whatever, because that was a huge like Go America moment.
The guy playing the stage manager in this episode's name was Peter Barth, and he's not an actor. He's an actual stage manager that worked on Gimme a Break elsewhere at NBC and came over to be in this episode. So
there is Natalie and Tootie are at the station, but we don't really have any more interaction with them, right? If I recall. I don't think we really. We see them kind of in the background. But
they're in the control room. That's where they are. Yeah. I think Natalie just takes delight in saying, "Roll them" or something like that.
Yeah, and so basically she says, no, she's not going to take the job because if it isn't right for both of them, then it isn't right for them at all.
Right. Well, and we knew that was coming because if this was in fact going to be picked up, they'd already established all these characters in Buffalo. So they weren't going to move somewhere else with all these guys.
And that sweet apartment that I have written down that it looks like it was like in maybe one of the other buildings that Mr. Roper managed. Like it looked like it was straight out of Three's Company.
That could be. You never know. I think that was on ABC though. Maybe.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely a typical 70s, 80s apartment.
Yes. Now, they do a sweet kiss at the end. You're supposed to think it's sweet, whatever. But that actually reminded me of the very beginning when we first meet them. He asks her for a kiss and kisses her and goes, numbers. Oh, my God.
And that's when we knew that this episode was going straight down the toilet.
Yeah, like who like greenlit this episode after that,
He could have MacGyvered it somehow.
Yeah, maybe. Now, something that I find interesting is most of the episodes for like maybe the first like 3-4 seasons, a lot of them are like on YouTube or you can buy them, like you can rent them like on Amazon episode by episode. I actually had to buy the season 2 DVD to get this one. because it was nowhere. And I don't know if that's because maybe it has like a separate, like almost like a separate rights issue because it was a jumping off point, or because it's just so horrible that nobody wants to admit it exists.
Well, I don't remember this episode ever before watching it on the DVD. So it's possible that it didn't even make it into the syndication package.
That is true.
I don't
that
know
actually
that for
is
sure,
true.
but why would anybody want to watch it? I guess
Yeah.
at this point. It's
Yeah,
almost
and
like
I'm
that
pretty
episode
sure-
of Brady Bunch, where they do
Yes,
Kelly's Kids.
with Ken Berry.
Yeah, I mean that one is in the syndication package, but you don't see it that often. I feel like.
Yeah, it's pretty forgettable as well, and that would make it into my top 5 worst jumping off episodes of any sitcom. ever.
Definitely, yeah, it's horrible.
Terrible. But
So yeah, I would probably agree without even watching the rest of the series that this is indeed the worst episode of The Facts of Life.
yeah, because any of the other ones, if they were bad, it was just bad because of other issues, other reasons. This was like bad, and it didn't involve any of the people we know.
Right. And there were some other backdoor pilots, so those could be pretty crappy too, but time will tell when the sitcom finally makes it into my rotation and I finish watching it in the year, I think it's 2073 maybe.
Oh, okay.
As many as I have, yeah.
You'll be sitting there with your 50 fruitcakes in the nursing home watching this.
Right. If only someone would think of me and bring me
I
50
know.
fruitcakes. But I did want to mention, so I did just out of curiosity look at some of the other high-rated episodes to see which ones the public seemed to like. And most of them seem to involve very serious topics or tragedies even. So I'm going to read off the plot lines of just 5 of them. And try to imagine these plots like applied to something like Leave It to Beaver. I mean, it's over the top. So Blair gets involved in a tough campaign for class president, but things take a serious turn when one of the girls commits suicide.
Oh, yes.
You remember that one, right?
Yes. And
I
in
mean, could you
fact-
imagine Eddie Haskell slitting his wrist because Wally made the swim team?
Yeah. Oh. And that actually, Mindy Cohn has said that she actually had a girl write her a letter after that episode and said she had been contemplating suicide, and that kept her from committing suicide.
Right. Well, I don't want to make
This
light.
show-
I don't want to make light of the fact that some of these maybe were very helpful episodes to help address these issues, but it just seems ironic for them to be on sitcoms. It's one of those
Yes.
very special episodes. So you mentioned
right,
this
and that's
one.
exactly what they would call the very special episode.
Yeah. And you mentioned this one. Natalie withdraws from her life after an attempted sexual assault, so she was Charlie Chaplin.
Right.
And maybe the guy had a Chaplin fetish.
I don't know.
Rather than a So here's another. In an article for the school's newspaper, Joe reports that her journalism teacher, Mr. Gideon, whom she thinks dislikes her, was arrested in a cocaine raid.
Okay, I just watched that one like 2 days ago. and that is one where, okay, so he did get arrested, but he was let go because he hadn't been actually doing any of the drugs. She publishes the story, but I mean, he did get arrested. That's what she published. But he ends up he has to resign from the school. And she's just like, well, we'll talk to them, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, Joe, there's some things you can't fix. And he walks out, and it's just total silence. She's standing there at his desk, and then roll credits. I mean, it is one of the few shows where I think they have that on more than one occasion where it does not have a happy ending and there is no resolution.
So not even a potential for comedy there, at least in the last 5 minutes of the show.
No, it was straight on, just like, dark.
And then Natalie fabricates a story about an unnamed Eastland student who had an abortion.
Oh, yes.
And then the final one I have here is Blair learns that her late grandfather, whom she idolized, was a supporter and benefactor of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
I mean, leave it. Could you imagine if the Cleavers found out that Uncle Billy was a Nazi?
Yeah, that would probably be like, we're gonna sweep that under the rug, okay? And in that one, doesn't she try to she kisses Tootie's ass, like she's trying to make amends for her family or something?
Oh yeah, that does ring a bell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if we, I mean, it basically, there was drug use, there was teenage marriage with Joe and her boyfriend Eddie. I mean, they basically hit all of the points, but a lot of times they did still manage to do the comedy, and it was very integrated into the show, unlike like Different Strokes when you'd have the very special episode. Like everything was just silly, and then we have then we have the Bicycle Man, which also...
It was hard to look at Mr. Carlson the same after that episode.
Yeah. And again, that has Dudley and...
Friday the 13th, we're back.
Yes, Dudley, who's Shavar Ross, who was Reggie the Reckless in Friday the 13th, Part 5, with Ron Sloan. Hey, ba-dum-bump. We could be here all night.
All the Friday the 13th connections to sitcoms.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I really want to kind of delve into with a focus on this show at one point is there are tons of horror and sitcom connections like that. And I'm not sure exactly where I want to go with that. Because like we said, it could get messy like real quick.
Right.
But so that was our first episode. And we'll bring you some other cool things. I don't want to give away all our secrets, like right out of the gate. Not sure what we'll do next, but I am sure there are certain shows that inevitably will be discussed in certain characters. So given that, and this is something we haven't discussed, and this may be like one of those like Sophie's Choice kind of questions that you just can't answer. What is your all-time favorite sitcom?
So I would say that my sentimental favorite sitcom is a sitcom called It's Your Move that ran for only 18 episodes, which made it all the more special because I know every single episode inside and out. It came about during my junior high years. I'm a couple years older than you, and I put them on VHS, recorded them, and watched them over and over and over again. Back then, introduced them to my sister and family, then to my daughter and her sister, and it's just been like a family favorite. And every one of my friends who would watch it, I show them episodes of this show, and it eventually got canceled mostly because it was a little too ahead of its time. It starred Jason Bateman, and he was kind of a conniving, scheming kid, junior high school kid who, he would sell tests to the other kids and things like that. And the show got so many complaints, I think, that NBC said, you've got to tone this down a little bit. We're getting complaints. So the last few episodes kind of became more of a conventional sitcom, which they're still funny, but it just didn't have sort of the kick that it needed. So it got canceled. The creators, Ron Levitt and Michael G. Moy, then went over to Fox and created Married with Children. So, yeah, I mean, everything is there for it to be a great sitcom. It could have lasted. It was just a little too ahead of its time, and it was on NBC rather than Fox, who didn't give a crap at the time, apparently, what they were showing. And still don't.
We will have to talk about that one. I do remember, I'm not where you are with it. I mean, I remember it being on, so 84 or 85, so I would have been about 8 years old. But yeah, I do remember this. And, Jason Bateman, obviously he went on, we talked about this the other day amongst ourselves, but he went on to do Valerie or the Hogan family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arrested Development, of course, and then numerous movies.
Yes.
But I have made it my passion now to track down and visit with as many people who appeared on that show as I can. And I was just actually in California a week ago and met with 4 actors from the show, believe it or not. So,
and when he says actors,
when I say
at least one of them was not still an actor.
Well, yeah, several of them may not be actors anymore, but they were at the time. And I've met a couple of the lead characters on the show and become friends with them. And then I still have some of them on my bucket list to meet, but I'm also trying to just meet anybody who appeared even in a small role on the show. and just ask them about it. So yeah,
I did not realize this because I've not seen that show since it was probably first run. But David Garrison was in that show, and he was Steve on Married with Children.
He made the jump. So. He's the only one that made the jump to the main cast of Married with Children. Mm-hmm. And I have had some close calls with meeting him, but it has not happened yet, unfortunately. But to go back to your original question, what's my favorite? Obviously, I know that's not the greatest sitcom ever made, but it's my sentimental favorite. But outside of that, I love The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. I love Leave It to Beaver. I love Cheers. I love Seinfeld. I love Newhart. Those are probably all my top favorites. How about you? Double Trouble. You said Double Trouble.
Double Trouble, yes, I love Double Trouble. That's like my It's Your Move. Like that show that I was so into, and I loved it, and I thought those girls were so awesome, and I wanted to be them, and I now am like so sad that it didn't go further than it did. But I would say my favorite show would be the one that raised me, The Brady Bunch. I seriously like. I know a lot of people say that, but like I feel like I was the Brady's seventh kid sometimes. I was really raised by television. I was a quiet kid, and I just, I would watch TV. I watched that, a lot of Scooby-Doo, that kind of thing, which that doesn't count for this. But I know those episodes inside and out. I adore them. I love the Bradys. I know this sounds weird, and I didn't have a super dysfunctional family or anything. I mean, I had, whatever. I mean, I had decent parents and everything. But I mean, nobody had a family like the Bradys. And when you look at it now, I don't know how many of you remember when Nick at Night first was Nick at Night, when they actually showed I Love Lucy and, the Brady Bunch and like more classic sitcoms. There was a guy, Dr. Will Miller. Do you remember him? He is actually a psychiatrist, and he does a lot of kind of like theorizing, or like not theorizing, but like he ponders a lot of these sitcoms and things. And he has said before, he was like, really the Bradys are the best parents because they let their children fail. They let their children learn their own lessons. They're not going to let them like get hurt or, let them fall so far that, things are bad. But they let them make their own decisions, and they let them fail on their own. And that really resonates with me. I'm like, maybe that's kind of shaped a little bit of who I am.
That's cool. And I didn't mention the Brady Bunch as a favorite, but it is definitely one of my favorites. I don't put it in the same league as like a Cheers or Seinfeld or some of those that are just so well written. Part of the charm of the Bradys is that at times it was so poorly written that you just loved the silliness of it all, the ridiculousness of it, and the characters were great, the actors were great, and I absolutely adore that show. And that's another show that I haven't really started trying to track people down outside of appearing at celebrity conventions, but if they were in a Brady Bunch episode, I am always gravitating toward them. I will always.
Ken Berry, he's coming for you.
Ken Berry. And Brooke Bundy. Brooke Bundy was his wife in that, and she is a Nightmare on Elm Street person.
She is, yes,
there you go.
And she's a Nightmare on Elm Street person, and do you know she's actually Tiffany Helm's mom?
That's right. I did. I think I learned that.
Friday Part 5.
I think I learned that from your video.
Oh my God. Oh, we're just going to have to go like Friday correlations between Friday 5 and Facts of Life and just keep jumping. Because we could make the jump easily, I'm sure, to get back to the Brady Bunch from the Facts of Life.
Right.
So.
Right. So there you have it.
Anyway,
there's
there you go,
everything we know about 2 episodes of TV that have been probably for most people long forgotten. But I hope this inspires people to go check them out if they can.
Yeah. And that might be what I end up doing while I edit. I might just turn on the next episode in my queue for Facts of Life.
All right.
Yeah. All right, guys. If you have any suggestions or any shows that you want us to talk about, just put it in the comments, and we will see you next time.
And if you're not learning about this from the Sitcom Kaleidoscope page, then I encourage you to go join the group, and I'm sure
we will put a link.
We'll definitely put a link, and you'll probably see a lot of things that entertain you on there if you're into sitcoms.
Oh, yes.
But thanks for indulging our passion, and I will talk to you next time. Signing off from young Bradley and
Becca.
If the coat didn't make you Mary-O, at home there's a bread!